Edward, Prince of Wales, better known as the Black Prince, was never crowned king, yet ruled the battlefield like one. Before we begin, let me clarify something. We're talking about the English warrior of medieval fame, Edward of Woodstock, the Black Prince. There exists another English king with the same name, the infamous Edward I, who united England and Wales and brought the Magna Carta to fruition. But today we will focus our attention on the warrior, Edward of Woodstock. It's a great-grandson of Edward I, whose achievements changed the face of medieval combat and whose accomplishments overshadowed his legacy. A warrior groomed for greatness, born in 1332, Edward III and Philippa of Hainault. He seemed destined to lead a golden age of English power. But behind the victories, the legends, and the black armor lay a brutal truth. His rise was soaked in blood, ambition, and war. A timeless tale of strength, struggle, and sacrifice. Let us begin. Born into war. From the moment of his birth at Woodstock Palace, Edward was royal. He was the heir to a throne already wrapped in conflict. England and France were locked in the early stages of the 100 Years' War over a crown, pride, and power. As a boy, Edward was trained like no ordinary prince. He mastered the sword before he could read. He learned strategy at the foot of his father, King Edward III, and his mother, a powerful noblewoman from the Low Countries, filled him with the fire of continental politics. By the age of 16, Edward led troops into one of the most famous battles in medieval history. The year is 1346. The fields of northern France tremble under the weight of war. A 16-year-old prince rides at the front, not behind his men. The French army outnumbers the English 3-1. Their knights are legendary. But the English hold a secret weapon: discipline and longbows. The Battle of Crecy would change warfare forever. Edward, still a teenager, commanded the right flank. French knights charged again and again and fell in droves to English arrows. By nightfall, over 1,500 French nobles lay dead, including King Philip's brother and the blind King John of Bohemia. Edward earned his nickname that day, the Black Prince, either for his armor, his brutal style, or the fear he inspired. Whatever the origin, the legend was born in blood, chivalry, and slaughter. To the English, Edward was the perfect knight, noble, fearless, and chivalrous. But ask the French and they would tell a different story. At the sacking of Limoges in 1370, Edward ordered his troops to storm the city. Over 3,000 civilians, men, women, and children were reportedly massacred. Edward had once promised mercy to the city, but when it rebelled, he unleashed hell. Was this the justice of a warrior betrayed, or the wrath of a dying man seeking vengeance? This duality haunts his legend. To many he embodied the code of chivalry. To others he was a ruthless enforcer of English dominance. The capturing of a king. Edward's most stunning achievement came in 1356 at the Battle of Poitiers. Outnumbered again, his forces lured the French into terrain that neutralized their cavalry advantage. His archers cut down knights. His men captured King John II of France. It was one of the greatest military victories in English history and one of the most humiliating defeats for France. The Black Prince personally treated King John with honor, even dining with him after the battle. But the cost of this war, and of holding a king hostage, would come back to haunt him. The Treaty of Britain, signed in 1360, made Edward a ruler of vast French lands. But holding them was another story. Despite the victories, Edward's health began to decline. Possibly suffering from dysentery or a wasting disease, he grew weaker with every campaign. His reputation suffered too. As Prince of Aquitaine, he levied high taxes to fund his wars. Rebellions rose. The once gallant hero was now seen by many as a cruel overlord. His marriage to Joan of Kent, a cousin and political ally, produced a son, Richard II, but Edward would never see him crowned. The Black Prince died in 1376, aged just 45, a year before his father, the king. He was buried at Canterbury Cathedral. His epitaph reads, "Such as thou art, sometime was I, such as I am, such shalt thou be." The Black Prince became legend. Shakespeare spoke of him. Chronicles glorified him. Even centuries later, Napoleon studied his tactics. But was he a noble knight or a dark executioner? patriot or a warmonger, perhaps both. He was a man of his time when chivalry and slaughter walked hand in hand, when glory demanded brutality, and when a prince could be more feared than any king. And what about his armor? Why did he wear black? Historians debate this. Some say it was for protection against the sun. Others, that it symbolized mourning. Edward's armor could have been jet black or simply well-oiled and polished steel. But the mystery adds to the legend. To understand the Black Prince, we must look beyond the battlefield. He was a product of his era, a time of immense change and upheaval. Medieval Europe was a patchwork of kingdoms and dukedoms. The old order was crumbling, new ideas were stirring. Feudalism gave way to centralized monarchies. Towns grew, trade routes expanded, and with them, new wealth and power. Men like Edward, born into this maelstrom, navigated a world where might was right and appearances mattered. Chivalry was all the rage, a code of conduct for the nobility, a mix of martial prowess, courtly manners, and religious piety. For a young prince, it was a heady brew. It meant adventure, intrigue, romance. To be a medieval warrior was to be larger than life. They weren't just soldiers, they were heroes, knights errant roaming the land, righting wrongs, and winning glory. But this world was not without its darkness. Warfare was brutal, resources were scarce, and loyalty was a luxury. The line between glory and infamy was razor thin. Edward lived and fought in this world, a world that demanded he be both lion and fox, fierce and cunning, compassionate and merciless. What led Edward to don the mantle of the Black Prince? Is it destiny or ambition? The answer likely lies somewhere between a medieval father's pride and a young prince's dream. Edward III, King of England, was a warrior king. He fought in nearly every major battle of his reign, including the battles of Crécy, Poitiers, and he was determined to forge a dynasty through war and conquest. In fact, he famously said, "By the right of God and our holy faith, we ought to recover the whole of France." For him, kingship was a sacred duty, a divine mandate. And his heir, Edward of Woodstock, was groomed for the same. As Edward III once said, "We shall make him a good and valiant king." Edward III wanted an empire. He wanted to unite England and France under one crown. He dreamed of a kingdom that stretched from the Scottish border to the Spanish frontier. This ambition was not merely territorial, it was a bid for supremacy, a chance to reshape Europe. And he saw himself as the instrument of providence, chosen to do God's work. For Edward III, kingship was a burden, a heavy crown to bear. He poured his heart and soul into it, often to the neglect of his family and his health. His wife, Philippa of Hugh, was a pawn in his game, a useful alliance but little more. His sons, especially Edward of Woodstock, were products of this upbringing, warriors first, princes second. When the 100 Years' War broke out, Edward III's attention was elsewhere. He was battling the Scots, suppressing rebellions, and expanding his possessions in Gascony. So it fell upon the young prince to take up arms against the French. Edward of Woodstock was eager for the challenge. At 16, he led his men into battle, showing courage and skill that made heads turn and hearts pound. The Black Prince was born on the battlefield, forged in the fires of war. The first time Edward of Woodstock faced the French, he was 16 years old. He wasn't supposed to lead troops, let alone an entire army. But that's how things went when your father was a king who'd rather be fighting than parenting, and who can blame him? The kid had swagger. He rode a magnificent destrier, wore gleaming black armor, and carried himself with the air of a seasoned warrior. But looks can be deceiving. That cocky teenager was hiding his inexperience behind a shield. He knew he was in danger, but he couldn't show fear. So he pretended confidence, hoping his enemies wouldn't notice his shaking hands or the beads of sweat forming on his brow. But his bluff was called. The French charged, and Edward found himself in the thick of battle, dodging blows, parrying thrusts, and trying to land his own attacks. It was a baptism of fire, a crash course in warfare. And he survived, not because he was a natural, but because his knights were better trained. The victory at Crecy cemented his reputation, but it was a fluke. The real test was yet to come. Poitiers was a turning point, not just in the war, but in Edward's life. When he captured King John II, he was hailed as a hero, the scourge of France, the vanquisher of kings. But the spoils of war came at a cost. Holding a king hostage was expensive. Edward had to keep him safe, feed him and wine him, and above all, ensure he didn't escape. It was a thankless task that drained Edward's resources and tested his patience. But he pulled it off, proving he wasn't just a hothead, but a strategist too. He kept the French guessing, maneuvering them, making sure they never got the upper hand. It was a psychological game, a battle of wits, and Edward won. The Black Prince had captured his father's imagination and the English crown. Edward III poured money, men, and material into his son's campaign. He wanted a decisive victory, and he got one. But at what cost? Poitiers was a financial drain. Edward had to raise taxes, borrow money, and squeeze his nobles for funds. The burden fell on the people, the farmers, the merchants, the laborers. Each coin they paid brought Edward closer to his goal, but further from his people. The war had become a money pit, a bottomless abyss that swallowed all in its path. As Edward of Woodstock surveyed his vast domains, he realized he wasn't just a warrior, he was a ruler. But how do you rule over people who hate you? Crécy was a mess. The locals didn't want him as their prince. They hated his guts. He was a foreigner, an outsider. They didn't speak his language, understand his customs, or care for his welfare. To them, he was a tax collector, a lord who levied heavy burdens, but offered little in return. They resented his troops, his castles, his laws. He was a symbol of oppression, a reminder of their lost freedom. Edward tried to win them over, but his efforts fell flat. He built castles, established courts, and appointed loyal officials, but nothing changed. The locals continued to hate him, and for good reason. Edward was a soldier, not a diplomat. He didn't know how to win hearts and minds. He couldn't speak French, so he relied on interpreters. He didn't understand their culture, so he ignored it. He was too busy planning his next campaign, dreaming of conquests, yearning for glory. To the people of Aquitaine, he was a distant, aloof figure, a man who lived in his own world. In the tapestry of medieval warfare, few threads shone brighter or darker than Edward of Woodstock, the Black Prince. His life was a paradox, a blend of chivalric ideals and brutal realities. His death was as mysterious as his armor, leaving historians to piece together the fragments of a fallen legend. As we ponder his legacy, we're left with more questions than answers. What drove him to don the mantle of the Black Prince? Was it destiny or ambition? How did his victories shape the course of medieval Europe, and why does his name still echo in the annals of history? Edward of Woodstock, the Black Prince, died young, cut down by illness before his potential could fully bloom. Yet in his short life, he left an indelible mark on the world. He was a warrior who defied expectations, a leader who inspired both admiration and resentment, and a legend whose memory continues to captivate us. His story reminds us that history is rarely black and white, that even in the darkest of armor, there can be glimmers of humanity, and that the victor's tales are not always the whole truth. As we delve deeper into the medieval chronicles, we must remember the Black Prince not just as a symbol of power, but as a reflection of our own. Complexity is a reminder that we are all products of our time, shaped by the world around us, yet capable of shaping it in turn.